Hey everybody, welcome back to the Evoke Bike Podcast. This is part 2 with James Piccoli, and we talk about managing the big racing and training loads, also some of his favorite intervals, and what he learned from the Endure book by Alex Hutchinson in Chasing Spatial Goals. A little bit about overtraining, but really more about finding where your limit is and how you do that and what the unfortunate consequence is. And then nutrition. Really, it's awesome to hear he's actually, when they're full blast, how many grams of carbs is he shooting for? And I hope you enjoy this podcast with James. Thank you so much, James, for your time. If you're listening on Apple, please leave us a review. We would greatly appreciate 5-star review. Helps validate us to others and helps spread all this awesome information that these athletes are sharing with us. Hope you have a great day and good luck with your training.
Trying to talk to people, I'm trying to think of where this started coming up of like turning the dials. I was talking to a guy one time, this was a couple years ago, had a really good sprint aerobically, just super poor. Like all he wanted to do was group rides. And he couldn't even finish. Like if there was a 60-minute crit, he's gassed at the end. And he's like, I just can't figure out why I'm not winning. I'm like, dude, you can sprint really hard when you warm up and you go sprint. You don't need more sprint power. You need some fitness to get to the end so then you can sprint. And it was like, you need to get yourself to the point of the race where you can unleash what you're really good at. But if you have all these holes in your armor, you're never going to have a shot at winning. Like it's just going to be super disappointing. So then what maybe changed when you had a coach? And how much input, how does that work? How does that relationship work? Now you're at the world tour. I mean, dude, you're on one of the top 19 teams in the world. How does this coach talk to you about this?
So I'm actually very lucky in that, on Israel Startup Nation, they've afforded me, they kind of trust me. And, you know, in talking to me, they have learned that I understand training and physiology and they give me a little bit of leash as to like what I need to do to prepare. So, you know, I was honestly worried about that as I was, you know, progressing in cycling. I said, what if one day I get to the world tour and every single day and minute and gram of my life is planned out. And then like, I never wanted that. And I am lucky. So they do give me a lot of flexibility in the way I train here. I'd say the one thing that's changed racing in Europe on the world tour is managing racing loads and training loads. So that's another thing that changes when you get to Europe is that you race a lot more. You know, it's hard to understand what, you know, 80 to 100 race days per year, not only what that load is, but people forget that you have to get to those races. And, you know, for example, I just got back from Rwanda. I raced for a week and then you traveled for a day and a half. So multiply that by every single race trip you need to do. And the kind of, the equation of training gets a lot more difficult because you have control over a lot less of the variables. That's, to be honest, took me essentially a whole year to figure out because, you know, up until that point, I had always had the opportunity to prepare perfectly for a race. You know, so I'd go to Gila, and like I said, I'd work on all the efforts I needed to work on. I could show up 100% ready and prepared, and I could just be, you know, razor sharp and have no weaknesses. Whereas on the world tour, you know, until you're like a Grand Tour contender, you know, I found out I was going to Milan San Remo about 12 hours before my flight was booked. You know, and I was training for a race in Spain, either like a stage race in Spain. And they're like, we need you to go to Milan tonight. You know, so that's the one thing.
Scary, like, okay.
Yeah. It's granted. So a lot of this is even worse now with COVID and, you know, people having false positives and, you know, people having real positives and people getting shuffled around. So it's the last year and a half has been a bit of a mess with that. But there is a lot more in the world tour, an element of, kind of lack of control of your racing schedules, or just like people moving around with racing, just because there's so many more races. So is it scary? at first it was really kind of discomforting because I'm someone who likes to have all my kind of ducks in a row. And whenever I would get a switch, it felt like I didn't have the chance to prepare for what I needed to do. But then this year I have more of the confidence of saying, okay, I'll prepare, and I'm more flexible now. So, okay, I know that even if I'm sent to somewhere where I wasn't expecting to go, if I've done some quality work, I'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of been the story of the first part of the season. It's actually looking like the second part will be a little bit more planned. But the first part of the season was like, I probably had, no joke, 15 schedule changes. But just it's, like I said, it's the nature of A, racing with coronavirus, and B, just the world tour and having so many events and so many moving pieces, that you just need to be flexible.
Dude, I'm getting like anxious hearing that because I had, Corona's messed up my timeline. I think 2 years ago, I was training for this. I was going to do a 350-mile gravel race in Iowa. Don't ask me why. So I was doing a lot of like super long stuff, and we were going to Joe Martin, and just the timeline, it sounded like we were doing the 1-2 race. I was like, you know what, against my peers, like I'm good. Like I can be a good teammate for somebody else. And like 5 days or a week before, they're like, oh, we're doing the pro race. And I was like, oh, that's going to be interesting. And the first stage, it was super cold and rainy, and I'm not the best bike handler. So I'm like, it's the whole pack, first stage, off we go. And I think you did Joe Martin, but it's that kind of like twisty turny, kind of up a couple climbs. And I was like, I'm just going to try and get away from this group and see if something goes up the road. And I tacked up in early, like, I don't know, 1-2 minute effort. And I like look over, I'm like, oh, we're not at the top. Totally blew up, got dropped immediately. It was horrible. And it was like just cold and crappy out. And I was like, okay, like wasn't ready for that blasting, but I was super nervous going into that race just because I have to be in not 350-mile shape if I'm going to try and race the Continental guys. And it just totally rocked me. So that's cool. They give you a lot of flexibility. And I'm sure you're able probably then to tap into, you're so into like the science side of things, like talking to more researchers, other coaches, other athletes, like, the best only get better. How's that been being around other world tour guys? Just like, I'm sure soaking in a lot of that. Yeah.
So that's the cool thing, is that obviously I continue to learn to this day and experiment, and tinker with the way I train and my nutrition and all that kind of thing. And I get to learn from, like you said, the best in the world, people who work for world tour teams. And so that's the way our kind of relationship is here, is that I'll like bounce some ideas off the coaching team or the nutrition team, and they'll say, oh, try this, we've been looking at this recently, or try these kinds of intervals, or like try training on this side, and they have all the data analytics software, and so they can analyze where they think I could use some work, and then they'll come to me with ideas, and it's very collaborative. That's allowed me to continue to learn about my body and training, and just, like I said, continuing to improve even to this day.
In mentioning intervals, obviously you told us about the polarized training, trying to be specific to the races, but are there any favorite intervals or new intervals that you've done that you're like, man, these really like tee me up to feel good before a race? Or are you more about the process and the skill of, whatever's more specific to the upcoming race, if that makes sense?
Both. So when I do have the opportunity, I tailor to the specific needs of the race. But in general, I'd say a type of interval that I like, I really like 40-20s. If I just want to like get a hard workout in. So I'll do 3 to 4 sets of 10-minute blocks of 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off. And I find for whatever reason, I can really push myself in those. And so essentially it becomes the hardest I can go for the 40 seconds average, so it's not like you do one at 1,000,000 watts and you die for the rest. So I tend to do them at like 500 to 600 watts. And I find just with those, it really simulates kind of the race rhythm, so like, that's another thing that people don't understand about FTP. is that if you've ever been in a bike race, you never do exactly FTP for an hour. That's just not how bike racing works. Even in a time trial or even up a climb alone, that's not the fastest way to ride, and that's not the way a peloton rides either. So it's almost useless to train that way, because in reality, in a bike race, you're fighting for position, accelerating out of corners, responding to attacks, whatever it is, and it's a lot of full gas recover, and I like those intervals because that's what one of the skills of racing is.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I was definitely more of a steady state guy. My coach Tom Bell's a mountain biker in the UK, and he is way more into like the over-unders and very much in the physiological side of things, of like tolerating lactate versus learning how to clear lactate are two very different things. And so it's been really good. I've always loved having a coach, just because you just continue, like you said, you continue to learn, you get different perspectives. He's training for different things than I'm training for, but like coming together on the same page has really been a cool process. What do you think? Is there any small things that you've done in your training that's had a big impact?
I'd say so. I just said about 40-20s, but the majority of what I call intervals, I very rarely hit the lap button on my second computer. And essentially what that means is that I'll pick a section of road, or I'll pick a climb, or whatever it is, that's about the length of interval I want to do. Mm-hmm. And I just do that instead of looking at my clock. And I do that for a very good reason. I read a book called, one of my favorite books on training, which I would recommend to everyone. It's called Endure. Mm. I forget the name of the author. Alex Hutchinson.
Yeah.
And in that book, it essentially breaks down all of the variables that sports physiologists have defined of what it takes to be a high level athlete. And he essentially breaks each one of them down and shows that at the end of the day, it's the brain that decides all of these things. So whether that's VO2 max or efficiency or dealing with heat or altitude, whatever it is, it's the brain. And one of the tricks of the brain is that if you have a spatial goal, so in other words, if you have a point that you're looking at in a running race, cycling, whatever it is, that feels shorter than having a time goal. So if you're just looking and waiting for 5 minutes on your Garmin or whatever it is, first of all, that's not how racing works. And mm-hmm. Second of all, I find I can push myself harder when I have a spatial goal. So if I just say I'm going to get to that point on the mountain, or that lamppost, or that whatever it is, or that finish line, I can push myself a lot harder than just saying I need to do X watts for X minutes. That was actually a little change that I think paid big dividends. And not only the physiological side of it, but just also changing the way I thought of being able to push myself.
It also sounds way more fun. It's going to be way more enjoyable to turn yourself inside out for that than you look at the timer and you're like, it's only been 5 more seconds. Yeah. Yeah. When did you start doing that?
I'd say 2018.
Okay, cool.
20.
Got a few more questions for you if you got time.
Of course.
Cool. I feel bad that you just flew back and you're like making a coffee. I'm like, oh my God. Yeah. Did you ever feel like you had maybe trained too much or were getting things wrong? Not like, you kind of talked about the high torque stuff not being for you. Any points where you're just like, I'm not doing this right?
Yes. So the only way to know where your limit is to find the limit, unfortunately. So I actually learned that last year. Last year I pushed it way too hard. And like I said, one of the challenges of World Tour is managing training load, racing load, travel load, outside stressor load. And so last year at the end of the Vuelta, I was so cooked because I trained as hard as I always trained. And then I added to that racing stress, travel stress, life stress of, you know, being in Europe. And I totally drove myself to the brink of destruction. I finished that welter on my hands and knees. But that's what, like I said, you only learn how tight you can tighten the screw once you've tightened it too tight. So I've learned from that mistake.
So is there a warning sign now, maybe? Because I think that's a very common thing. Like when you're feeling good, you want to add more. I've definitely done it to myself. What do you think? What's the red flag now, do you think?
I mean, luckily we get a lot of, you know, like physical and medical exams with Israel Startup Nation. So we get, you know, regular blood tests. And so we can monitor like variables in our hormones, variables in our blood, you know, to see when we're actually doing damage. But obviously the first step is just like, you stop getting better. And you start putting in equal amounts of work and getting worse, or more work and getting worse. That's like kind of the first indicator. And then obviously it progresses to actual hormone imbalances, stuff like that. But yeah, the first marker is that you're working harder and not getting better. That's maybe when it's time to say like, okay, maybe I need to change things up or rest a little bit more or take my foot off the gas.
That's good to hear. Yeah. Because that's when people get nervous and they're like, I need more. It's like, no, don't do more. Yeah. It's a bad idea. Yeah. Last training question for you. Do you cross train or lift? And if so, kind of does it change throughout the season?
It does change throughout the season. So honestly, in season, I do almost 100% cycling training. I do very little of anything else. Off season is a different story. I like to do all kinds of just general activities, stuff I think is fun. You know, I played hockey for a long time, so I like to skate still. I go for hikes, long walks, do a little bit of, I should do more, but I do a little bit of strength training, but I should take it more seriously in the off season. And just general sports with friends. But nothing, but off season, I like to take, and just as well as physically, just mentally recharge and do things that I don't get the chance to do during the season, you know, cause you know, if I went to go play a game of pickup basketball, before like the Tour of Utah, like I would probably be wrecked for a week, you know, like you get to this point in being a professional that you're so good at one thing that it makes you really bad at everything else in your life, like literally everything. And so, yeah, I enjoy being just like a normal human in the season.
It's funny you say that. Carl Patrick Lauk is a racer in France right now, and he really enjoys walking. And he's like, I've made the mistake of being like, oh, it's just like a 5-mile walk into town. Oh, crap, I have to walk back. And he's like, it can wreck you more when you're just riding a lot. And so, yeah, some of those basic enjoyments you're not really privy to all the time. You had mentioned nutrition, and we'll kind of wrap up with that. People love to hear what you're doing on all facets of training, racing, meal before the race, recovery. Kind of when you think nutrition, where is your brain going?
So nutrition is actually where I think a lot of the gains in the peloton have been made in the last like 5 to 10 years, I'd say. Nutrition has really been an area where like cyclists have started to understand, you know, if you can tune it precisely to what you're doing, you can get like big gains. So the answer to your question is complicated because there's a lot, you know. So in a nutshell, when you race, you only race on carbohydrates, and you essentially want to be able to process as much as you can for as long as you can. So you need to train your stomach, literally train your stomach and your gut to be able to absorb the maximum amount of carbohydrate you can per hour for whatever your race is.
Do you have a number that you're targeting?
We sponsor plug. We have Morton as a sponsor.
I love plugs, dude. I love plugs. I love codes. Just throw them out there.
But I'll only plug something if I genuinely believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
But Morton has been something that I can tolerate a lot better. Because to be honest, that was also a problem I had last year. Was I just wasn't able to eat enough during racing. And like we aim for, essentially when we're racing flat out, we aim for between 100 and 120 grams per hour of carbohydrate, which is a lot. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have, A, if you haven't trained your stomach to be able to do that, and B, if you don't have products that you find tolerable, it's impossible to do. And then of course you end up being worse because you feel terrible. You know, you bloat and you feel just like you can't ride. So yeah, 100 to 120 grams an hour while you're racing. And then, so the flip side to that is that if you want, the latest research says, if you want the most out of training adaptation, you should also do some type of training, some intensity at lower carbohydrate. Because then you get a lot of cellular signaling and you get a lot of adaptation from that. And so then essentially when you get to the race, your body has adapted to using little carbohydrate, and then you can use a lot, and then you kind of get both energy pathways. But it is very complicated to plan this. It's very complicated to get it right. That's why, like I said, there's been so many gains in nutrition, is because it's become so finely tuned now that, you know, getting the most out of racing and training, it's like different needs, and it's easy to get it wrong as well. So it's easy to have not enough in training, or too much in training, or not enough in racing, or too much in racing. So that's where, like you said, nutritionists, we have two full-time nutritionists on the team. And, you know, like guys still get it wrong and I still get it wrong.
And also, I think interwoven with this for amateurs, to your previous comment of a lot of people are making the easy too hard and the hard is too easy, that then they're going on their quote unquote easy ride and they're doing it low carb and they're riding a ton of tempo and like low threshold and they're bonking. And I'm like, dude, that's not an easy ride. And you're not eating for that ride. And so it's just like, it becomes this mishmash, and then they go to do like the hard day and they haven't replenished the glycogen stores. They have no energy. And I'm like, this is really, it's super complicated.
It's very complicated.
For people to hear you say this is excellent.
Yeah.
So what are you doing the day before? Does the day before maybe a one-day race or going into Grand Tour, or how are you approaching the nutrition? Are you carb loading at all, or is it like, tell us about that a little bit.
Again, it depends on the context of the race. I think also what I've learned about my body personally is to carb load. What you want to do when you carb load is to maximize your glycogen storage, obviously. And for me, I find it better to have less of a carb load and replenish glycogen by lowering volume and training intensity. So in other words, like a couple of days of just eating normally and training a little bit less, and then carb heavy meal before the race, the night before, as opposed to doing like a big carb load and eating a lot, because I find that my stomach was never able to really tolerate that well. And then I couldn't eat enough in the race, and then, you know, you'd have stomach problems. So that's normally what works for me, is I'll eat pretty normally until essentially the meal before the race. And that's when it's time to really focus on carbohydrate.
When you say the meal before the race, is that breakfast or is that the dinner before?
That's the dinner before.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's fun. I've gone through a bunch of different ways of trying like the 2-day carb load, which just seemed like way too much for me. Then like the 1-day carb load, but I was eating carbs all the way until I was in bed going to sleep. And now I've kind of come to a similar thing of, and I like to stop 2 hours before I go to bed, just be like, cut it off, go for, do something so that I'm like digesting, get up, go to the bathroom. I feel way less bloated, but still feel like your legs are like ready to crush. And it's a really good feeling. And then, So are you with the Morton, are you drinking more of the carbs, or I guess it depends on the type of race, or do you like to eat also, or how does that break down?
I actually like to, so one of the Morton products is 80 grams of carbs in a bottle. So it's a lot. It's very sweet, but I prefer to drink more just because it's in a stressful race situation. It's kind of easier to drink something than it is to unwrap a bar, you know, and that's another thing that people tend to forget about in racing is that, especially in big pelotons, especially in Europe, like 99% of the time of the race, no joke, is fighting for position. And that takes a lot of energy and like, you don't have time to like, oh, I'm going to like enjoy this bar. I'm going to open it. I'm going to struggle. And I'm going to take both my hands off the bars. Like, you don't have time to do that. It's just like you like when it comes to the nitty gritty of race, you just want the easiest way to get carbohydrate into your stomach is the best way. And for me, I find that's drinks and gels.
Fair enough. Man, dude, this was amazing. My last question for you? What would James be telling the 2011 James?
That's a good question. Yeah, I probably wouldn't tell him anything. I'd probably let him figure it out. I'm really grateful for my journey. And I think looking back, I wouldn't be the cyclist I am today if I didn't have the struggles, if I didn't have the failure, if everything came too easy. So if 2021 James went to 2011 James and said, this is all the stuff you need to do. And it all worked right away. And I never had those struggles. Like you kind of alluded to this when you said, you know, you see these people who do really well and then they quit. I think in the long term for a professional athlete, it's much worse to have success early on than it is to have failure. Because the sport of cycling, unlike a lot of sports, is probably the one where you fail the most. Like literally the best bike racers in the world win, I don't know, 10% of the time, maybe, you know, like, so the rest of that is losing, and you have to get really comfortable with failure. You know, like you can be in like some of the cyclists people look up to win once a year, twice a year, you know, so the other 80 times they lose, you know, and that's really difficult if you haven't been exposed to that your whole life, or your whole career as a cyclist. And so all of that to say is that I probably wouldn't even say anything to him.
No, man, it's good. I think you wouldn't have your main characteristic of resilience and just fighting, because like, yeah, it would have been just, you would have had all the cheat codes and known what to do. And, you know, dude, this is incredible, man. I cannot thank you enough. This is going to inspire so many people and just help people through their journey of cycling. I lied. My real last question is, where are you seeing this journey going? Where are you trying to take this thing?
Honestly, all I want out of my second career, all I've ever wanted, all I continue to want, is to enjoy myself, is to make the people I care about proud, and is to, I mean, I guess that's it. Those are the two basic, like, winning is gravy, you know, like I don't want to say I don't care about winning, because I'm obviously a professional athlete and I'm competitive. But if number one and number two aren't satisfied, I don't really care. So I just want to continue to have a great time, love what I do, have fun, continue to make the people who I care about proud. And that's it.
Dude, that's incredible, man. That's awesome. Hope to see you on some big GC podiums, dude. They're definitely coming your way. Keep being resilient, grinding. Like, there's so many people cheering for you, making Canada proud. And yeah, dude, like, thank you for doing this. This is amazing. And taking the time with your schedule. It was top notch. Can't thank you enough, man. we'll definitely. People want to follow you online. You on Instagram or use Facebook more? What's kind of your thing so people can see?
More Instagram. I'm not very good at social media, but I put some stuff on Instagram. And if you want to see how I train and race and ride, Strava.
Sweet.
And that's it.
Awesome, dude. We'll put all the handles and tags and stuff like that down below and in the description. We'll tag you and post in a few weeks. And dude, best of luck. Enjoy the quick little downtime. And then the next race is
Ruta del Sol in about a week.
Very cool. Well, we'll be rooting for you, James. Thank you again, man. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you so much.
See you, man.